Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Corbett. How are you?
Well, I'm very well, Jamie, and as you know, I've got two new hips in. I've got more titanium in my body than the Iron Man had. I'm more sprightly than I have been for a long time. So I'm feeling good, and obviously it's lovely weather outside, etc. Being very English, I have to mention these things. Yes, and I'm looking forward to our chat, the first of a series, a podcast series, which is new for us in Talk for Writing.
Yeah. Something we've talked about for a while, isn't it? And it's well, we're quite excited about it really. And this is the first episode, so the first one that will go live. But we've got a good run of guests lined up because it's well, particularly you have a good circle of friends. You've collected some fascinating people sort of over the years, and we've got some good connections. And I thought, well, I feel like we should tease the first few, and just so people kind of know what's coming. So we've all of these are confirmed. So the first few episodes will be Piers Torday, the author. So he's written a number of books now, and well, he's a fantastic author, but he speaks really eloquently about what it means to be an author, and really talks about being inspired by things like Narnia and being inspired by what's around him. So yeah, I've seen him speak a couple of times, so I'm really looking forward
Yeah.
to talking to him.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that because I got to know him through his father, really, um, who wrote a book called Salmon Fishing in the Yemen, which was a
Oh wow.
ridiculous concept, but it was a beautiful, elegant book. They turned it into a film in the end. I mean, you know what it's like with reading? You read one and you think, oh, I really like that. And then, of course, I had to read everything by him. And then sadly, he passed away, but his son, Piers, finished the last book. And then he started producing books for kids. So I went from the father into the son. And yes, he's a cracking writer, and I'm looking forward to that particular session. What else have we got lined up?
Well, we also have another of your contacts. So Shirley Clark
Yeah.
is going to come and do a session with us, and well, I have to admit, I reached out to Shirley, and I wasn't sure if I'd get a response or whether we'd need you to reach out because to me she's a bit of a superstar of the educational world really, and yeah, it's going to be really interesting to sort of pick her brain. I know we've sort of talked a little bit about some directions, and obviously assessment for learnings. We can't not go down down that channel. You've got some thoughts around sort of adaptive teaching and things like that, haven't you?
Well, I want to ask a show. And Shirley and I we go back a long way. I think, I think she is the guru of formative assessment in primary education in this country. One of the reasons why Shirley's work has been so powerful is that she has run for years action research groups. So she's not somebody who just pontificates about stuff, but her thinking has been grown and developed with teachers, trying things out in the classrooms and sort of reporting back. She speaks with great clarity, great enthusiasm. And I do want to ask her if adaptive teaching is just formative assessment under another name, which I
Mm,
suspect it is.
mm,
I think somebody in Ofsted used the term adaptive teaching, and people then thought, oh, we'll leap on that one and turn it into a thing and sell it to people.
mm.
But from my stance, I think, and this will be interesting to hear from her. I just think it's decent formative assessment. So she's a great thinker, very clear thinker about education. She doesn't do what I do, which is to ramble and rant about this, that, and the other. I've made a speciality over the years of ranting about all the horrendous things. We could have a quick rant now if we wanted to about the stats being delayed. Oh, it's just horrific. How could you be that dreadful as to put us all into a real problem with that one? Anyway, we'll put that to one side perhaps. But yeah, it'll be great fun to meet up with Shirley again. We used to do a lot of work together, catch up with her, and just hear her views on really on what she's learned from a long career in education, a distinguished career, about
Mm.
that key element of formative assessment. And we're going to talk about things like, this the sort of the workload thing and not marking. And you meet
Mm.
schools and teachers who say, oh, workload, we don't mark anymore. That has always worried me, as you know, so much. And I know in your school that the teachers are attentive to what the children have written and do give them feedback and do use that information to plan what they're going to do next, with the children, and get the children to reflect on their own learning. So there's a lot to discuss with that. So that's two really good sessions I'm looking forward to. What's the third one?
So the third one that we've got lined up is Susie Cady, she is an early years teacher, and she's an early years teacher at one of the talk writing centres. I'm saying this, I know that you know who Susie is, Pi. I'm saying this for everyone else's benefit.
Yeah.
And she's a fantastic character, a fantastic early years teacher. And she presented at the Talk Writing Convention a couple of weeks ago with some of her colleagues on teaching in the early years, and particularly this idea of inventing stories with young children. And she just spoke so eloquently and with such enthusiasm that just a fantastic person to have on, really.
Absolutely. I dubbed her the Wonder Unicorn. Um, yes, she's a lovely person for starters. She's got that incredible element of being, and you can't really teach this to people. She is an engaging human being, and small children are sort of drawn to her.
Mm,
But as you rightfully say, it's not just sort of glossy fluff and glitter. There is a rigor there in terms of she works in West St Leonard's. It is a coastal area, and we all know that standards in coastal areas have not been good near Hastings. And the it's to put it crudely, it's white working class, and it's tough. Everybody knows that that is the toughest um, educational challenge that we face. And she uses story in a way that I think liberates their children as readers and writers. I think it's more than just she's getting them to make stories up, but it's sort of a bigger thing than that.
mm,
I think it gives them confidence. I think it helps them understand themselves. I think it helps them understand what's happening to them. It gives them metaphor in their life. I think she's doing very, very important work. And it's, yes, I'm really looking forward to that, digging under the skin of, well, practically speaking, I mean, A, why do you do it? Well, I've sort of hinted at some of that, but B, more importantly, what is it you actually practically do? I think there's a lot to learn there. Um,
yeah.
all the documents talk about, early years documents talk about they mention storytelling in passing, don't they? It's one word. It's here and then it's gone. But in the work that I know you do in your school and that they do in West St Leonard's, that work on early creating store of children making up their own stories, developing and growing their own stories orally, oral composition right from the word go. That uh, I think is very, very significant. And if you look back, we've had so much on phonics and handwriting. We've spent millions and millions on that. And you think of all the hours that go into that. But I don't know if we've spent a single penny on composition and comprehension. And I do a lot of wasted my time on the internet and various places in America, like the Michigan Center for Literacy or whatever. I've made that one up, but so I saw a thing the other day, a sort of like an advert, and it was all about the science of reading. Well, I sort of worry slightly about the term the science of reading. It's a bit of
Mm,
an off-putting term for many people, but I think there's an art to teaching reading as well as what we know scientifically about in terms of what goes on in the brain. But it was a list of key things from the science of reading, and I just wrote at the bottom, perhaps it might be a good idea to mention composition and comprehension, which is rather the point of the whole thing, and you've missed
Mm,
it out. So I know somebody at the other end will be sitting there thinking, well, isn't that darned obvious? Well, it may be obvious to you, but we've had so much on the nuts and bolts, the bit that about 30% of kids need fairly rigorous phonics teaching because they aren't just going to get it. My kids just got it really through being read to a little bit of phonics at school, and then they were underway. I keep saying to those who are phonics people, whenever you train, always mention reading. Always talk about a good book that you're reading. That's the
yeah.
point of the whole thing. And you have to keep reminding teachers, particularly when you get inspected. And we all know that if you aren't doing rigorous phonics work, then that will be mentioned and you will be, probably downgraded, etc. So it's a very high priority in our schools. And yet we still have a big percentage, 25 to 30% of children who are still struggling with reading. So we've sorted one thing out, but it has
Mm,
been, I think, at the expense of comprehension and composition, which, as you know, is a massive part of what we do in Talk for Writing right from the very beginning. And that's what Susie does from the very, very beginning. She's got the oral composition going on, kids making stories up and learning that, the underlying, the up and down story mountain pattern, embedding that pattern, and the language, the sort of narrative architecture that's needed. You can't really get going with much of a story until you can do Once Upon a Time. And you're
yeah,
going to need,
yeah.
unfortunately, at some point, because something awful's going to go wrong, and then you've got to put it right. So you're going to need, oh, luckily. So there's core language that is part of the narrative architecture that you need, the linguistic architecture that you need in order to shape a story. And if children don't internalize that shape and those languages, those aspects of language, what happens is they tend to ramble.
Mm,
They rabbit on about any old thing. Well, that actually we can take children beyond that rambling where they are drawing on everything. They're drawing on their own life. They're drawing on bits of TV. They're drawing on bits of picture books, etc. We can, and Susie shows this very clearly. We can help 4 and 5 year olds begin to shape a nice little narrative which actually coheres, where one event leads to another, which leads to another, and oh dear, that's awful. And then it leads to a resolution and wrapping it up with an ending. And if they go into year one with that confidence as a storyteller, it's setting teachers up very, very nicely in terms of the rest of their writing career.
I think that was what struck me from what they were saying and when Susie and her colleagues presented. And one of the other centres said something similar, and they had this great slide, which actually I think we put out on social media. And it was talking about composition before transcription. And I sat at the convention and I thought, in my head, I thought that's exactly what I feel like I say to people, but I don't say it as clearly as that. And
Yeah.
this great slide that if you've not got anything to say, then there's nothing to work on in terms of transcription. The composition has got to come first, and it reminded me of something that you've said for years about reading, because there are those parallels, aren't there? That there's this odd idea that comprehension comes after decoding, as opposed to comprehension starts at birth, if not earlier. And decoding is this thing that we sort of add on, a bit later on for a period of time, but comprehension is developing all the time. And yeah, Susie and her colleagues and the other centre that presented, I just thought they articulated that, so beautifully. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. Well, no, we can't have favourites, so I'm not going to. But I think that will be a great, yeah, a great session as well. It's I guess it's probably a good, having spoken about the guests, I wonder if it's a good time to consider why we're doing a podcast now. What beyond you made me laugh a moment ago, Pi, because you said about having a good rant about things. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, if you didn't do that, then we wouldn't have a podcast series. This is what we need.
Like over the years, James, as you know, I've particularly the live conferences. If things happen in education, and I sound like Victor Meldrew sometimes. Things happen, you just think, I can't believe it. How could people be either that inept or that ridiculous? And
Yeah.
I we live in such an odd time in that people, they either it's fear of Ofsted, or it's
Mm,
fear of being belittled by other people, or it's fear of sort of I'm in a mat and I thought I was the head teacher of the school, but I'm not really head teacher of the school. I just do as I'm told. But I have a feeling that I can say things because I'm old and I don't really care. And, what are you going to do to me anyway? So I can say things that perhaps other people are thinking, but daren't say. And I sort of know that to be true because people have come up and said, I love the way you said that. It's what I've been thinking for absolutely years. And it was so
mm,
good to hear it. And it binds us really together. That
mm.
I think that those little rants about the frustrations that we get in education, where it's a hard enough job as it is,
Mm.
without people from the outside coming along, um, putting pressure on other people. People in schools who are doing a good job. They're cracking on. They are. I could say this. I think primary school teachers, they are the salt of the earth. They're the backbone of the country. They're doing a cracking good job in there. And often it's despite cannon fire from the outside, with other people coming along, sometimes who've never even taught, sometimes who haven't taught for a very long time. I suppose you could say I haven't, but then, as you know, I always do some writing workshops every term. And I do that deliberately just to remind, well, A, because I like it and love it, but also to remind myself teaching is difficult, it's tricky. And you get things like, last week or whenever it was, when it was swelteringly hot. I mean, some schools, the more modern ones, yours might have been like this, I don't know, but the more modern schools where there's a lot of glass, some of those classrooms would have been horrendous to be inside.
Yeah.
It's so difficult. And as I say, I think there's an opportunity to voice some of those things. Um, and if it does nothing else, it sort of makes one feel better that you had a good old go about it.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
know what I mean. The other thing is, as you said earlier, Jamie, over the years, I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of interesting people, writers, educationists. I've luckily worked with a lot of absolutely cracking teachers. And I do think sharing things and talking through things and supporting and encouraging is incredibly important. When I
Mm.
worked in Kent in the LEA, um, I developed this idea that showing interest in what other people are trying to do is hugely important. A bit of kindness and showing interest. Simple things like from my desk, I would ring somebody up who I knew who's in a school I'd visited and they were trying something out. And I might, after about a month, ring them up. So I'd write it in my diary and then I'd ring them up and say, how's it going? That's interesting. I'll come out and have a look at that or whatever. Just showing interest in other people's endeavors can be very, very powerful, particularly if you're an outsider to the situation, because you've got no reason really to bother to phone them up. Being bothered is not a bad idea. So all sorts of
Yeah.
reasons. And building a community, our talk writing community, um, teachers who believe in the same sorts of things like upfront active teaching, engaging children in, as you said, was suggesting, Jamie, things worth writing about. How can you do some writing if you're not fired up, motivated, have something to say? That comes
Mm.
first. The composition, having something to say, comes first. And of course, the comprehension is from day one. Comprehension. what's the point of the decoding if we aren't also at the same time developing comprehension from day one through sharing fabulous picture books, as you will have done at home, Jamie, with your kids, and I did with ours, and now little Arthur is our grandson. Um, and he loves his story and he loves being read to and he likes to make stories up. It's great fun. It's like magic. You just say, Arthur, once upon a time there was, and then leave a space, and he says, a little boy. And then you say, who was called? And he says, Arthur. And he goes, your eyes like saucers. And then I do silly things like say, one day he was under the sea swimming and there's a blue blanket, and I throw the blanket on the floor and he goes under the blanket and he's being a fish. So we sort of play out and make up stories together. It's just, for me, it's great fun. But it's also for him not only fun, but I think it's significant that you can story things in your life.
Yeah, yeah. Do you find with Arthur on the for some reason my children who are still quite young, their favorite time to make up stories is whilst they're sat on the toilet. And I don't I don't know, I didn't start it like that, but that for some reason it's turned into a thing. So
You could publish a book of stories called The Toilet Stories.
it's a
Uh,
very good idea.
Arthur's not got that far. He did declare, he's only 2 3/4. He did declare to his parents that he was no longer wearing a nappy. Um, so unfortunately, the desire to go nappy free was not matched by his ability to control
Yeah,
the
of
body.
course.
That was a bit of an experiment that went sadly rather wrong.
Yes, yeah. God bless him. That's fascinating. Because just listening to you talk, and obviously, we've talked about this podcast, and I think I said earlier, we've talked about this for a while, and and you mentioned their community, but one of the things that sort of struck me as you were speaking was almost that idea that maybe education's sort of becoming a little bit in extreme bubbles of, over here we only do this, and over here we only do this, and that's that. And actually, what I sort of took from what you were saying is sort of trying to give a bit of a space to think outside that box and listen to other views and other opinions.
Yes.
And we probably should have said this earlier on, that we've decided to call the podcast Talk for Teachers. And I sort of sat here feeling quite suddenly realized that really fell together with that is what we're sort of trying to create a space for, is a bit of space for teachers, for teachers to listen and think about teaching and listen to other teachers. And it's a space that is beyond, I guess, the bubble of your own school, your own trust. So yeah, that's quite powerful, really.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. It one of the things I've learned is that you can think that something doesn't work, and maybe for years have believed that. And then you go along and you find yourself in a classroom where what you think doesn't work seems to be working really rather well. And
Yeah.
you may not understand why, but we have to be open-minded in
Mm,
terms of listening with generosity to other people and other views and other ideas. However, how will we move forwards if it's
mm,
sort of, and again, you look at the rigors of Ofsted, etc., and the national curriculum, etc. If people aren't out there experimenting, brave enough to, I'd love to take a school, Jamie, and say, perhaps in a challenging area, and say, actually, I mean, here's a revolutionary thought, but what would happen if in reception we didn't actually set about teaching phonics, etc. We left the more formal aspect to year
mm,
one,
mm,
and we spent more time in reception building the basics in terms of oral composition, flooding them with stories, um, lots and lots of making stories up, etc. Lots of language development work, rich, interesting, engaging curriculum, lots of activities to develop pencil control, early sound work and games so they can discriminate sounds, etc. I've got a sneaky feeling that if we did that, then when you formally started, not only would they know, oh, I know what this is for,
Mm.
This is actually going to help me to be able to read and write. Not only would you get that understanding, because some kids haven't been read to at home, they haven't got a clue what we're doing when we start. They don't understand that, the squiggles on the page make the words, and it's a great thing, and I've been read to for 4 years. They haven't got that behind them. We're starting from scratch. So I just got that sneaky feeling, and I know anyone listening to this will. The likelihood is they'll sit there and think, yeah, I've often thought the same thing myself. I just think we would get much quicker and stronger development if we did it that way around. But nobody's going to be able to experiment with that
Mm.
because if you did, you'd get into trouble. Um, so how will we ever move forwards on some things? So you're right. It's a space to question, to listen, to hear people who perhaps got other ideas, other viewpoints, other ways. You look at the teaching and writing, a lot of people out there who've got different strategies and ways of doing things. And I guess I don't know, but if we looked across the country, we'd find that perhaps approaches you and I might not agree with, maybe in some classes they work perfectly well, and perhaps we should listen to those people and think about it. So, an open mind, exploring a range of different issues, plus the odd rant, listening to other people, um, and I think about the young teacher I was driving home. It's about a 40, my first school was about a 45-minute, sometimes an hour, depending on traffic, journey home. And I would love to have turned on a podcast and spent that time listening and thinking and laughing and joining in with the rant, shouting at the radio, etc. I would have really enjoyed that as company, apart from anything
Yeah,
else, company.
yeah. And then go back in school the next day and say, "Well, Shirley Clark said."
Exactement, Shirley Clark said,
Absolutely.
who is such an incisive, clear thinker.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to chatting again with Shirley.
Well, shall we round off with we're going to have a regular feature, aren't we? And
Yes.
um, books and literature are well, they're such a part of your life, my life, and I'd like to think every primary school teacher in the country's life, really. So we're going to be asking each of our guests, aren't we? Something, what's something that you've been reading recently, and we're quite interested to see the direction that goes in terms of children's literature, but also other things that people have been reading. So I'll ask you, Pi. What's something? I'm looking at the big row of books behind you. I reckon you're
That,
spoiled for choice.
that's
What have you
nothing.
been
I
reading?
tell you, there's piles of books on the floor here. Well, um, yeah, I thought a lot about this. I read a lot of trash in the holidays, and because our work is serious, I mean, it's fun, but it's serious, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
It's very serious because it makes a difference to children's lives if we get it right. So to relax, I do read a lot of trash. I also read a lot of children's literature. But the book I would like to mention today is The Murderer's Ape by Jacob, I think you say Wegelus or Wegelus. I'm not too sure how you pronounce it. The Murderer's Ape. It's quite an off-putting title if you work in a primary school, but
Yeah.
one might fear a title like that. But actually, I think it's a year 6 or 7 book. It would be a good reader for a child who likes to get into a meaty text. Have you seen it?
No, no,
Oh,
no. That's unusual.
it's it is it's big. There's a lot, and it's an extraordinary story. It's like Les Miserables. It's massive in its scope, um, and it's about an ape who works with a captain of a ship who gets imprisoned, and he goes outside the prison, and and then it's like an odyssey. I mean, this ape goes across the world.
Wow.
And I won't say any more about it other than it is beautifully written. It's one of those books you look forward to bedtime because you're going to get your
Mm,
head into a couple of chapters.
mm,
It's meaty, it's sustaining, it's a massive story, and I'd love to read it it would easily last you the whole of the summer term in year six
Mm,
as a terrific read to sign off on. And I
mm,
recommend it to everybody who, I mean, it's a great read for an adult anyway,
mm.
um, but an extraordinary book. The Murderer's Ape, it's called.
Yeah, I wrote it down as you said it. I know. That's good. It's fantastic. Yeah,
What about
it's
you?
well, I said this to you the other day. At the moment, I've become that person who has started multiple books and haven't finished any of them because I have multiple books on the go. But I determined 2 weeks ago that I was finally going to start The Wolf Wilder by Catherine Rundell,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's one of these books that has sat on my bedside table for far too long, and I've
Yeah.
said I need to read this. I want to read this, and I've read other things, and I decided 2 weeks ago, right, this is it. I'm starting to read it, and um, somewhat fascinatingly, it has a very similar context to one of the other books I have on the go that is a non-fiction text about a journalist who decides to ride his bike down from the most northern point in Europe and in essence follow the Iron Curtain all the way down and has a quite a horrendous time because the conditions are really quite terrible. And the Wolf Wilder starts off in a Russian landscape. It's very cold. It's very wintry. So I found that was an interesting comparison to happen to be reading two things that were set in similar places at the same time. But there was also a particular bit that I read, and I thought, well, Pie, have you read The Wolf Wilder, Pie?
No, I read the
Uh,
beginning of it. It's one
yeah,
that I've got to finish, if you know what I mean.
yeah. There's a particular bit that I thought, oh, this Pie will love this. There's a particular line, and it's the main character's introduced to someone comes into her house, and it says the man had a face made of right angles. And I thought, what a fantastic bit of description. And I thought Pie would love that. But I then made the mistake of telling Mrs. Evans this, and Mrs. Evans, who is also a teacher, used to when she was younger, did some modelling for a while, and she said I think she was trying to catch me out. She said, "Have I got a face of right angles?" And I didn't know how to answer that. So I put down and left the room immediately. I'll tell you the whole line because it does carry on. The man had a face made of right angles, a jutting nose and wrinkles in angry places, deep enough to cast shadows in the dark. I mean,
Wow.
what a line! It's just
She's a
incredible.
she's a powerful writer, very elegant writer. I mean, we know she's a very bright woman. She's done a lot of work on John Donne, the poet, very distinguished scholar. And her writing is superb, I think. Is it called the recent one, Impossible Creatures?
Yes, we were looking at it, and I've got a copy of it somewhere. Typically, it's not in
There's
front
two
of
of
me.
them now,
Yes, yes.
which I loved reading because the prose is so beautiful. I think the second one actually is an even more engaging story. But
Mm,
she's certainly one that you would want kids in primary school to have met at least once, if not twice, for the power of the writing. Bit like Kieran Millwood Hargrave,
yeah.
who is another literate. Well, they both do the same thing. They write cracking yarns that are beautifully written. So there are a lot of books out there for kids to have in their back pocket um, that are fun, amusing, engaging, maybe pacey, etc. But you wouldn't say they had the lasting literary quality. But I think
Mm,
Catherine Rundell and Kieran Millwood Hargrave, they are the Joan Akins of this age. They are the high quality literary writing that all children should experience.
mm,
And the other books, great. It's like Enid Blyton for me. I read all of those,
mm.
um, which meant I ended up, as you know, writing like Enid Blyton. But in class, I think books of quality like The Wolf Wilder are incredibly important, as you know.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well that probably brings our first episode to a close, and that means that when we see everyone again, it will be with one of our first guests. So very much looking forward to that. and we'll be releasing the first few episodes quite close together so that people can really get on board with those. And well, I think for now we won't go further with saying who we've sort of lined up after that, but we've got a good run of meaty stuff to. What was the phrase you used? Rant about meaty stuff to rant about. Which yeah, I think now that you've said it, I think I feel more convinced than ever that yeah, this is a good time to be doing this.
Yes, absolutely. And okay, well, we've had a good chat, and that those journey books will, I no doubt, will, your journey from the bicycling journey.
Yes.
There are a lot of books about journeys that fascinate me. One of the early ones I read when I was a teenager was Laurie Lee's "As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morn," where literally, because he lived in the valley over there. We'll talk about it some other time. Maybe I'll talk about that book. But he literally left home and he ended up walking down through Spain. And it was one of those books, significant teenage books. It made me want to leave home and go and travel. So
Mm,
we'll talk about that another time anyway, because I think all of us probably as teenagers had books that mattered, that were touchstones for us.
yeah.
Great, really enjoyed it, Jamie.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Okay, right. Well,
Right.
bye bye everyone, and we
Yeah,
will see you.
bye.
See you all
Bye,
soon.
everybody.